There is a cold that lives in the body of a wolf, whose mate has cast her off, and it is not like any other cold. Because it comes from the inside, from the place where another soul used to be tethered, and now is not. I had been dying of that cold for 11 days when I finally understood that the only way to stop it was to risk the one thing that had caused it. He stood over me with his hand held out. The offer, the bond, the thing my whole kind is taught to reach for. And I lay on the stone too weak to lift my head. And I understood with perfect clarity that if I took his hand and he changed his mind, if I let myself be tethered again and was cut loose a second time, the severing would finish what the first one started, and I would simply stop. One rejection had brought me to his gates with nothing. A second would put me in the ground. And he was asking me to risk exactly that, on the word of a proud cold king I had no reason on earth to trust, because the alternative was to lie on his floor and let the cold take me. I had to choose. And I want you to understand, before I tell you any of it, that I had every reason to say no. I did not go to him on purpose. I went because my legs gave out, and his gates were right there. He opened them. My name was Fenna, and 11 days before I lay dying on an Alpha King's floor, I had been a mated Omega with a small good life, which only goes to show how fast the floor of a life can drop. I was an Omega, the lowest rank the packs keep, the rank you are born into when your blood carries nothing the pack can use. But I had been mated, which is more than most Omegas get, to a rising young lord of the Stoneholt pack named Caster, who had chosen me when I was 19, and he was not yet important. It was not a fated bond. Most matings are not. The fated kind is rare, a thing the old wolves speak of in hushed voices, and what Caster and I had was the ordinary kind, a chosen mating, a bond made by will rather than by fate. But it was real, and it was warm enough, and for 4 years I let myself believe that a low woman could keep a rising man, that being useful and quiet and devoted would be enough. It was not enough. Rising men rise past the things that were enough. When Castor's ambition outgrew me, when a marriage to the Lady Ravna, high-born and connected and exactly the rung he needed, came within his reach, he did the thing the law allows a wolf to do to a chosen mate. The thing that is permitted and rare because of what it costs the one it is done to. He rejected the bond. He stood in the hall of Stoneholt and spoke the words of rejection over me. Formally, before witnesses, severing 4 years with 3 sentences, and then he had me put out the gate. Because a rejected mate is an embarrassment, and an embarrassment is best kept far away. I will not pretend the words were the worst of it. The worst of it was the cold that came after, the severing, the way the rejection of a mate bond does not simply end a marriage, but tears something out of the body that the body does not know how to live without. For a strong wolf, it is agony. For an Omega, low, weak, with no reserves of strength to draw on, it is often death. I walked away from Stoneholt with nothing, no pack, no rank, no mate, and a cold spreading through me that I understood, with a strange flat calm, was going to kill me. Because that is what rejection does to a wolf like me, and everyone knows it, and that is rather the point of being allowed to do it. I walked because lying down meant dying faster. I had no destination. I want that understood, because the whole realm later told this story as though I had set out to throw myself on the mercy of a king, as though it were a plan. It was not a plan. It was a dying animal walking in the only direction the road went, and the road went toward the capital, and the capital had the king's fortress at its heart, and the king's fortress had gates, high, iron, famously shut, the gates of a cold king who turned away petitioners and refused all comers, and on the 11th day my legs gave out exactly there, at the foot of those shut gates, because that was simply as far as my body could carry me before it quit. I did not knock. I did not beg. I had no strength left for either. I folded down onto the cold stone at the foot of the most powerful wolf's locked gates. And I closed my eyes, and I prepared to die there, which seemed as good a place as any, and better than most. And somewhere far above me, a window opened. I did not see him at the window. I was past seeing anything. But I have heard the story since, from a dozen horrified advisors, and it goes like this. The Alpha King was at the high window of his solar, where he stood most mornings looking out over a realm he ruled and did not seem to enjoy. And he looked down and saw, at the foot of his shut gates, a rejected Omega folding down onto the stone to die. He could not have known the particulars from that height, could not have known my name, my pack, my story. But he could see what I was. A rejected wolf has a way of carrying the cold that another wolf can read from a distance, a wrongness in how the body holds itself, the unmistakable mark of a bond torn out by force. The king saw it, and the king, who turned away lords and envoys and petitioners with letters of introduction, who kept those gates shut against the whole pleading world, said one word to the guard at his door: "Open them." His advisors did not understand it. They have spent, by their own account, months failing to understand it. The king of the cold fortress, who let no one in, who had refused every match and every supplicant for years, came down himself. Himself, the advisors keep saying, as though that were the strangest part, and perhaps it was, and crossed his own courtyard, and knelt on the stone outside his open gates, beside a dying rejected Omega he had never met, and gathered her up out of the cold, and carried her inside, and would not let anyone take her from him. I woke 3 days later in a warm room in the fortress of a king I had never spoken to, still cold to the bone, but no longer dying, with no idea why I was alive, or why the most powerful wolf in the realm had opened his shut gates for a thing the whole world had agreed was worthless. It took me a long time to understand the answer, and when I did, it broke my heart, because the answer was not pity. The king's name was Ragnar, and he was exactly as cold as the song said, which I had cause to study closely, because for the first weeks of my strange new life he watched me with a guarded, unreadable attention that I could not place. He was a proud man, proud in the particular way of a wolf who has built his whole self into armor. Every word measured, every feeling buried so deep the court had decided there were none. He ruled well and warmly toward no one. His advisors feared him, and he had never taken a Luna, never courted, never shown the slightest interest in the matches his council had been pressing on him for years, which the realm had decided meant the Iron King was simply too cold for love, married to his crown. He came to see me as I recovered, which scandalized the household, and he did not say much, and what he said was clipped and careful and gave nothing away. But I was an Omega, and an Omega learns to read the powerful the way a sailor reads weather, because our survival depends on knowing the mood of people who do not think we are worth a mood. And the more I watched the cold king who had inexplicably saved me, the more I saw a thing that made no sense and would not stop making no sense, until finally it made the only sense there was. He carried the cold too, not the fresh, killing cold I carried. Mine was 11 days old, and his was years deep, but the same cold, the same wrongness in how a body holds itself, the same mark of a bond torn out. I knew it because I was living inside it, and you cannot hide that particular wound from someone who has it, however deep you bury everything else. The proud, cold, mateless Alpha King who had opened his shut gates for a dying, rejected Omega was, himself, a rejected wolf. He had not saved me out of pity. He had looked down from his window and seen, at his gates, the one thing in the world he had never been able to speak of, his own wound, walking, on someone else's body, and he had not been able to turn it away. If you have ever been recognized, truly recognized, not pitied, by the one person who carries the exact wound you carry, and so does not flinch from it, then you know the strange, frightening warmth that began to thaw the cold in me those first weeks, and you know it is not a thing you can refuse once you have felt it. I am going to tell you who had rejected the king, and how the people who threw us both away had built a kingdom's worth of power on the throwing, and what it costs a dying wolf to risk the bond a second time. Stay with me to the open gate and the offered hand. I came to him with nothing, and meaning nothing by it, and it turned out to be the truest thing I ever did. I learnt the king's secret slowly, in pieces, because a proud man does not hand you his deepest shame. You have to earn the edges of it. But I had time, and I had the particular permission of a fellow casualty. And eventually, by a fire, looking at the flames and not at me the way he said all the hardest things, Ragnar told me. Years before, when he was newly crowned and not yet armoured, the Alpha King had loved a high-born woman named Ravna. More than loved, he had believed, with the certainty of a young wolf, that she was meant for him, and he had offered her everything, the bond and the crown and his whole unguarded self. And Ravna had weighed it, and weighed what else was on offer in the realm, and rejected him. Not cruelly, even, practically, she had decided that a cold young king with a hard reign ahead of him was a poorer bet than a rising, charming, ambitious lord with a softer path, and she had refused the Alpha King of the Iron Reach to his face and chosen the other man, and the king had survived it the way strong wolves survive rejection. He had not died of the cold. He was too powerful for that. But he had never been warm again. He had buried the whole thing so deep that the realm believed he had simply never loved, and he had ruled from inside his armour for years, the most powerful wolf alive and the most certain, in the one secret room of himself, that he was a thing that could be weighed and found wanting and set aside. I let them think me too cold for a Luna, he said, to the fire. It was easier than letting them know I had offered everything I had to one woman and been told it was not enough. A king may be cold. He may not be rejected. So I became cold, on purpose, where the whole realm could see, to bury the truth that I had been refused. He finally looked at me, and then I stood at my window and saw a wolf dying of the exact thing I have spent years pretending never happened to me, and I could not stand at a window and watch the realm do to someone else what it had done to me, and call it mercy that I looked away. So I opened the gates. I did not know how to explain it to my council. I still do not. The truth is the one thing I cannot say to them, that I let you in because you were the only person I had ever seen who knew. And then he told me the rest, the part that turned my slow private grief into something with a target. The lord who had rejected me to rise, my caster, had risen by mating the high-born Lady Ravna. The very woman who had rejected the king. The two people who had thrown us away for each other. They had built their whole ascent, their power block, at the heart of the court, on two rejections, his and mine, a man who cast off a useful Omega, and a woman who cast off an inconvenient king. And they had risen and risen on it. And they were, even now, among the most powerful figures in the realm. I had not been rejected by a random cruel man. I had been rejected by half of the couple that had also broken the king, and the two of us, the discarded Omega and the discarded king, were sitting by a fire in a fortress, while the people who discarded us ruled. You can imagine that Lord Caster and the Lady Ravna did not love the news that the two people they had thrown away had found each other. They learnt it the way the court learned everything, slowly, then all at once. The rejected Omega the king had inexplicably taken in did not die as expected, did not fade quietly, did not get sent away. She recovered. She was seen with the king. And worse, far worse, the king, the cold, mateless, armoured king, whose refusal to marry had made him safely predictable for years, began around her to thaw in ways the whole court could see and none could explain. And Lord Castor and Lady Ravna understood, faster than anyone, exactly what it meant, because they were the two people in the realm who knew what the king's coldness had been hiding. If the rejected Omega became the king's Luna, two things happened that they could not survive. The first was that the truth would come out, that the Iron King had been rejected by Ravna years ago, and that her whole power rested on the king's secret shame staying secret. The second was simpler and older. A man who has thrown a woman in the gutter cannot bear to watch her crowned. And Castor was a small enough man that the watching alone would have moved him to murder. So they moved against me, the way the powerful move against the low, first with the law, and then with a knife. The law came first. Castor stood up in council and made the case that a rejected Omega had no standing to be near the king, that I was a fortune hunter preying on His Majesty's well-known solitude, that a wolf cast off by her own mate for cause was self-evidently a creature of bad character, and that for the good of the realm I should be removed from the court and the king protected from my manipulations. It was clever, because it used my own wound against me. Who would believe a rejected Omega was anything but worthless? Her own mate had judged her so. The council, who already did not understand why the king had taken me in, leaned toward Castor, and for a stretch of days it looked as though the law itself would put me back outside the gates. It failed for one reason, and the reason was Ragnar, who did the first warm public thing of his reign and simply refused, would not release me, would not explain, planted his cold royal will against his whole council and held. But a king who refuses to explain himself only buys time, not safety. And Castor, seeing the legal road close, took the other one. This is the part where the dying woman who had lain down at the gates with nothing had to decide whether she had anything left to fight with. And I will tell you honestly that for a while I did not think I did. Because the severing was not done with me. A rejected bond does not heal in 3 days or 3 weeks. The cold had retreated when the king took me in, but it had not left, and it would not leave. Because the thing that truly heals a rejected wolf is not warmth or time, but a new tether, a new bond to replace the one that was torn out, and I would have died before I reached for another bond. Because the last one had nearly killed me when it broke, and to risk a second breaking was to risk a death I would not survive. I was healing slowly only because Ragnar's strange, fierce care was a kind of anchor, an almost bond, enough to keep the cold at bay, but not enough to drive it out. We were two rejected wolves keeping each other from freezing, neither of us willing to risk the one thing that would actually thaw us, because we had each offered that exact thing once and been told it was not enough. And then Castor took the choice out of my hands, because cornered cruel men always do. He could not kill the king. The king was surrounded and strong. But a rejected Omega, half-healed, still cold, still fragile from a severing everyone knew could kill her at any time. A rejected Omega could simply die of her wound, sadly, naturally, no hand visible, and who would question it? Everyone knew the severing took them in the end. So Castor arranged for the small thing that would tip a half-healed rejected wolf back over the edge. He got to the source of the fragile anchor that was keeping me alive. He could not break the king's bond to me, because there was no formal bond yet. But he could break the king. I do not have all of how he did it. The king's man Brand pieced the rest together. But the shape of it was this. Castor and Ravna, between them, set out to make Ragnar believe that I had played him, that the rejected Omega had learned the king's secret wound and was using it, working his sympathy. A manipulator, exactly as Castor had told the council. They were good at it. They had Ravna, who knew precisely which words would land on the king's oldest fear, the fear that he was a thing that could be weighed and found to be a poor bet. And for a few terrible days it worked. I felt the anchor weaken. I felt Ragnar pull back into his armor, watching me again with the cold, guarded eyes of the first weeks. Wondering. I could see him wondering whether the one person who had known his wound had only been using it. And as he pulled back, the cold came forward, and the severing I had been half surviving began, quietly, to finish. That is the dying I promised you at the start. Not a knife. A withdrawal. Caster did not have to murder me. He only had to convince a man who had been rejected once that he was being played, and let the man's own armor do the killing, and let the cold take the rejected Omega the way everyone always expected it to. I lay on the floor of that fortress with the cold closing over me, and I understood that I was about to die of the same thing twice, of a man deciding I was not worth the risk, and I found, at the very bottom of it, that I was angry, and that anger was the first warm thing I had felt in days. So I did not die quietly. I dragged myself up, and I went to find the king, and I said the thing that a rejected Omega is never supposed to say to an Alpha King, which was the truth, all of it, with no softening for his rank. "They are doing it to you again," I said. My voice came out cold and clear, from the same place the anger lived. Ravna rejected you once by convincing you that you were not worth the bet, and now she has convinced you of it a second time, and you have let her, because it is the story you already believe about yourself. You think I was using your wound. I was not. But I see why it was so easy to make you believe it, because the one thing a rejected wolf cannot imagine is that someone might actually choose him. And so the moment Ravna whispered that I was only pretending, you believed it. Because being used is at least a story where you were never really wanted in the first place, and that hurts less than risking being wanted and refused again. I was shaking, and not from the cold now. I am dying, Ragnar. The severing is taking me, because you pulled back, and you are the only anchor I have. And I could let it. It would be easier than this. But I am not going to die letting the same two people win twice. So I am going to tell you the truth and let you do what you will with it. You did not save a manipulator at your gates. You saved the only other person in the realm who knows your exact wound, and somewhere in these weeks I stopped being grateful to you and started being yours, fated. The real kind. The rare kind neither of us has ever felt, because we only ever knew the chosen kind that breaks, and I have been as afraid to say it as you have been to hear it. Because we have both offered everything once, and been told it was not enough. I held out my hand, the way he had once held out his. I am offering anyway. Take it or do not. But do not let them tell you one more time that you are not worth the risk. I came to your gates with nothing, and I never wanted a single thing from you but the one thing you are most afraid to believe anyone could want, which is you. That is the offered hand the cold open promised you, except it was mine offered to him, and his to me, both at once, two rejected wolves, each holding out the exact thing that had nearly destroyed them, asking the other to risk it. He took my hand, and the bond that formed was not the chosen kind, the made-by-will kind that Caster had spoken over me and broken in 3 sentences. It was the other kind, the rare, true kind, the fated bond that the old wolves speak of in hushed voices, and it slammed into both of us with a force that drove us to our knees on the fortress floor. Because a true bond forming over the wreckage of 2 rejections is not gentle. It is a thing tearing through years of armor and 11 days of killing cold, all at once, and we knelt there gripping each other's hands, while it burned the old severing out of me, and the old shame out of him. It hurt more than the rejection had. I have never been so glad to hurt. The cold went out of me for the first time in 11 days, driven out at last by the only thing that could drive it out. which was a tether that would not break, offered by the one person who had as much reason as I did to never offer it again. When I could breathe, I was warm. For the first time since Stoneholt, I was warm. And the Iron King, kneeling on his own floor with his rejected Omega's hand fused to his, looked at me with the armor finally, fully gone, and said, "They told me for years I was too cold to love. I let them, because it was easier than the truth. I am done letting them." He rose, and he drew me up with him, and the cold, proud king, who had buried his rejection for years, turned to face the court that had never known it. It shook the realm, and the shaking was the point. Ragnar did the thing no alpha king in the history of the territories had ever done, the thing that cost him more than any war could have. He stood before his assembled court and told them he had been rejected. He named Ravna. He laid his oldest, most carefully buried shame open in front of every house in the realm. That years ago the Lady Ravna had weighed the Iron King and found him a poor bet, and that she and the lord she chose had built their whole power on the secret of it, and on the matching cruelty of Caster casting off an Omega to climb. He told them that he had spent years letting the realm believe him too cold for love, rather than admit he had been refused, and that he was finished protecting the people who had refused him at the cost of the people they had thrown away. You cannot imagine what it did. A king admitting he was rejected should have been the end of him. Pride is an alpha's whole standing. Instead, it was the end of Caster and Ravna, because their entire power had rested on the king's shame staying buried, and the moment he spoke it himself, in his own voice, by his own choice, it was no longer a weapon anyone could hold over him. Their block collapsed. Caster's cruelties, once the king's men went looking, were many and provable. They were stripped and cast out, Caster put outside the gates with nothing, which I will admit I did not weep over. And the realm learned a lesson it had badly needed, which is that the rejected are not the worthless, that the cast-off thing at your gate may be the truest wolf in your kingdom, and that even a king is allowed to have been wounded and survive it without being less. The advisors finally understood why he had opened the gates. It only took them admitting that their cold king had a wound, which took them rather longer than it should have, because the powerful are always the last to imagine that the powerful can hurt. It is a year now, as I set this down, and I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which the older courtiers have decided to find dignified rather than admit they cannot explain it. The iron mating band I wore to his gates, Caster's band, the one I could not take off for 11 days because the severing would not let go even after the man did, is gone. I took it off the night the true bond formed, finally able to. The cold that had welded it to me at last melted out, and Ragnar had it thrown not into the river, but into the forge, and from the iron of it he had made a single nail, which he drove into the great gate of the fortress himself, low, where you would have to kneel to see it, in the spot where I lay down to die. He says it is so he never forgets what he nearly left outside. I think it is so the gate remembers it was opened. We do not argue about which, for the gates of the Iron Reach do not shut any more. That is the thing the realm marvels at now, that the Cold King's famous locked gates stand open, that any wolf cast off with nothing may reach them and be let in, because the king who once looked down from a window and could not bear to turn away his own wound-walking has decided that no rejected wolf will ever again die at his foot for the crime of having been found wanting by someone unworthy of the finding. They come now. The rejected, the cast off, the severed, and the low. The gate stays open. I see to it personally, because I know exactly how far a dying wolf can walk, and exactly how it feels to fold down at a locked door, and exactly what it is worth to have it open instead. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to, and always does. and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the morning he opened his shut gates for a dying Omega he had never met. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as cold, and that I now know is a once-rejected man, choosing a true word over an easy one. "You write it as though I rescued you," he said. "As though I looked down from a window and chose, out of some greatness, to save a stranger. I have let it stand, because it is the kinder story, and you are kind to a fault, but I will say it where you cannot unwrite it." He set his hand over mine, where the iron band used to be. "I did not open the gates to save you, Fenner. I opened them because I had spent years standing at that window, looking out at a realm that had refused me, frozen behind glass. And then one morning I looked down and saw my own wound lying in the road, dying. And I understood in a single breath that if I left you out there, I was leaving myself out there. That the cold I had been ruling from inside of for years was about to take someone else. And that I could not survive watching it. I did not save a stranger. I went down to that gate to save the only person who could prove to me that being rejected did not have to be the end of a wolf, and you were. And you did. And you saved me the same hour I saved you, which is the only kind of saving I have ever trusted since." He almost smiled. "So do not write that I rescued a dying Omega. Write that two rejected wolves lay down at the same gate, years apart, and that the second one was the first thing that ever made the first one get up. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think." He swears he opened the gates because he recognized his own wound in me, that it was not mercy, but recognition. One rejected wolf, unable to abandon another. But I only reached those gates at all because they were the closest shelter my dying legs could carry me to. I did not choose him. I chose the nearest wall. So, who truly brought us together? The king, who saw his own grief in the road and could not look away. Or nothing grander than exhaustion and a road that happened to end at his door. Did fate send me to the one wolf who would understand? Or did I simply fall down in the right place, and we made the rest into love because we were both so tired of the cold? Tell me your verdict below. I read every one, and so, he has confessed, does the king. And if you want to stay inside the open gates with us a while longer, comment the open gate, and I will tell you next what happened when the realm's other rejected and cast off wolves, having heard there was finally a king who would not turn them away, began arriving at our door, and what we built for them, who knew better than anyone what it is to be found wanting. So if you are ever cast out with nothing, wherever you are listening from tonight, and your legs give out at the nearest wall, pray it is a wall with someone behind it who knows your particular cold. I lay down to die at a stranger's gate. He opened it because he had been lying at a gate his whole life too. Sometimes the only one who will let you in is the one who was never let in either.